I never thought I would be the person telling this story. For 3 years, I lived alone in a small cabin at the edge of an Appalachian mountain town, more surrounded by forest than civilization. It was peaceful there. Or at least it was until the nightmares started. What happened to me in those woods changed everything I thought I knew about what exists out there in the darkness. This is the true account of how a Bigfoot saved my life from something far worse than I could have ever imagined. My cabin sat on 5 acres at the very edge of town, backed up against thousands of acres of dense Appalachian forest. The nearest neighbor was half a mile down a dirt road. I had bought the place cheap because most people did not want to live that far out, that isolated. But I loved it. The quiet, the trees, the wildlife. Of course, living that close to the wilderness came with challenges. Bears would wander through my property looking for food. Wild boars tore up my garden. Deer ate everything I tried to grow. Raccoons got into my trash no matter how I secured it, so I did what any sensible person would do and installed security cameras all around the property. 8 cameras total, covering every angle of the cabin and the immediate clearing around it. I checked those cameras every morning like clockwork. It became part of my routine. Make coffee, check the cameras, see what visited during the night. Most mornings it was just deer or the occasional black bear passing through, sometimes a fox or a coyote. Normal mountain wildlife, nothing unusual. For 2 years, life was simple and predictable. I worked remotely as a software developer, spent my evenings on the porch watching the sunset, and slept soundly every night. The isolation never bothered me. If anything, I thrived in it. Then, about 3 weeks before everything changed, the nightmares began. The first nightmare hit me like a freight train. I woke up at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. In the dream, something massive was moving through the trees toward my cabin. I could not see what it was, only shadows and movement, and the sound of branches snapping under heavy weight. The thing was getting closer, and I knew with absolute certainty that when it reached me, something terrible would happen. The details of the dream were vivid in a way that normal dreams never were. I could feel the cold mountain air on my skin. I could smell the pine trees and the damp earth. The sounds were crystal clear, each snap of a branch distinct and directional. I knew exactly where the thing was coming from, could track its progress through the forest by sound alone. And I was paralyzed, unable to move or call for help or do anything except wait for it to arrive. I tried to shake it off, just a bad dream. I drank some water, checked the cameras on my phone, saw nothing unusual, and went back to bed. But sleep did not come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shadows moving between the trees. The second night, the same dream came back. Same massive presence moving through the forest. Same feeling of dread. Same moment of waking up in terror before it reached the cabin. This time I was more shaken. 2 nights in a row felt like more than coincidence. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had watched too many horror movies. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. Maybe I was stressed about work and my subconscious was expressing it through nightmares. But none of those explanations felt right. By the 3rd night, I was already dreading going to sleep. I stayed up late, watching television, scrolling through my phone, doing anything to delay the inevitable. When exhaustion finally forced me to bed around 2 a.m, I fell asleep immediately. The nightmare was waiting for me. This time, the presence in the dream was closer than before. Close enough that I could hear its breathing, heavy and rhythmic. Close enough that I could feel its weight shaking the ground with each step. But still, I could not see it, could not identify what it was. Just movement in the darkness coming for me. And the 4th night and the 5th, every single night for 3 weeks, the same dream, Something huge moving through the trees, getting closer each time. The feeling of being hunted became so real that I started waking up certain I could still hear branches breaking outside my window. I would lie there in the dark, listening, trying to separate dream sounds from real sounds, never quite sure which was which. By the second week, the dream had evolved. Now I could see glimpses of the thing through the trees, just flashes, quick impressions that disappeared as soon as I tried to focus on them. Dark fur, massive shoulders, eyes that caught the moonlight and reflected it back. But never a clear view, never enough to identify what I was seeing. I became obsessed with checking the cameras. Every morning I would review the footage from the night before, scanning for anything unusual. Bears, deer, raccoons, nothing out of the ordinary. But the nightmares continued, relentless and vivid. I was losing sleep, running on maybe 4 or 5 hours a night, jumping at every sound. The exhaustion started to affect everything. My work suffered, my appetite disappeared. All I could think about was that dream and the terrible certainty that something was coming for me. I stopped going into town except when absolutely necessary. The drive felt like wasted time I should be spending watching my property. I let my garden go. I stopped answering calls from friends and family. My entire existence narrowed down to the cabin, the cameras, and the nightmares. I started seeing patterns in the camera footage that probably were not there. A deer that appeared 3 nights in a row at roughly the same time must mean something, right? A branch that looked broken in one frame and whole in another must have been disturbed by something large. I was grasping at straws, trying to find evidence that would explain the dreams, validate the fear that was consuming me. My work performance got so bad that my boss sent me an email asking if everything was okay. I'd lied and said I had the flu, was recovering, but still felt weak. The truth was too absurd to share. What would I say? That I was being haunted by nightmares about something in the forest? That I was spending 18 hours a day reviewing security footage of nothing but wildlife? That I had not slept properly in weeks? By the 3rd week, I looked like a different person. My face was gaunt from not eating. Dark circles ringed my eyes. My hands had developed a constant tremor from too much coffee and too little sleep. I had lost maybe 15 pounds. When I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror, I barely recognized the hollow-eyed stranger staring back at me. After 2 weeks of this, I drove into town one afternoon to pick up supplies. I stopped at the only bar in town, a small place where locals gathered. I sat at the counter nursing a beer and talking to a friend about nothing in particular. The exhaustion must have shown on my face because he asked if I was feeling all right. Without really thinking about it, I told him about the nightmares, how I kept dreaming about something in the forest coming toward my cabin, how I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees, how I was barely sleeping anymore. The words just tumbled out, and once I started talking, I could not seem to stop. I told him about checking the cameras obsessively, about losing weight, about feeling like I was losing my mind. My friend tried to be supportive, but I could tell he thought I was overreacting. Maybe you should see a doctor, he suggested. Maybe you are working too hard. Maybe you need a vacation. All reasonable suggestions that completely missed the point. This was not stress or exhaustion or anything that could be fixed with a doctor visit. This was something else entirely. An old woman sitting 2 stools down overheard me. She was probably in her 70s, with long gray hair and sharp eyes. I had seen her around town before, but never spoken to her. She turned to look at me, and the expression on her face made me go quiet. It was not pity or concern or amusement. It was recognition, like she knew exactly what I was talking about and took it deadly seriously. She slid off her stool and walked over, standing right next to me. Up close, her eyes were intense, almost uncomfortably so. They held mine without blinking, and I felt like she was looking through me rather than at me. "Be very careful," she said. Her voice was low and serious, barely above a whisper. "There is a reason the first people who came to these mountains were afraid when they arrived. There are things in these old forests that have been here far longer than any of us, things that do not want to be found. But sometimes they find us instead." I tried to laugh it off, make a joke about mountain superstition, but she did not smile. She just held my gaze for a long moment, then leaned in closer. "Your dreams are trying to tell you something," she said. "Listen to them, prepare yourself. And whatever you do, do not trust voices in the dark that sound like people you know. Not everything that speaks with a familiar voice is what it claims to be." Then she turned and walked back to her seat, not looking at me again. My friend tried to lighten the mood, saying the old woman was known for her strange warnings, that she told fortunes and read tea leaves and generally spooked the tourists. But her words stuck with me. They rattled around in my head the entire drive home, mixing with the exhaustion and fear until I could not tell which thoughts were mine and which were echoes of her warning. That night, the nightmare came again. But this time when I woke up, I could not shake the feeling that the old woman knew something I did not. On the 5th night after meeting the old woman, I had the nightmare again. 3 weeks of the same dream every single night. I was exhausted, running on fumes, barely able to function during the day. When I woke up that morning, I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app before I even got out of bed. I started scrolling through the footage from the night before, expecting to see the usual parade of deer and raccoons. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Then I reached the footage from camera 3, the one mounted on the northwest corner of the cabin, and my blood went cold. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m. In the frame, illuminated by the infrared light, was a face. Not a bear, not a person, something else entirely. The creature was massive. Dark matted fur covered its face and head. Its features were human-like, but definitely not human. The eyes caught the camera light and reflected back with an eerie intelligence. The nose was flat and broad. The mouth was set in what almost looked like a contemplative expression. It was looking directly at the camera, studying it. A Bigfoot. I was looking at footage of an actual Bigfoot standing maybe 15 feet from my cabin, staring at the camera like it knew exactly what it was. My hands were shaking as I watched the rest of the clip. The Bigfoot creature looked at the camera for about 8 seconds, then turned its head slowly to look toward the forest. Then it simply walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of the camera. I sat there in bed, frozen, replaying the footage over and over. This was real. This was not a nightmare. There was a Bigfoot on my property, and it had been close enough to touch my cabin wall. And suddenly I knew the nightmares were not just dreams, they were warnings. This Bigfoot creature was what had been moving through the forest in my dreams. It was coming for me. And now it had found me. That night, I did not even try to sleep. I turned on every light in the cabin and set up my laptop on the kitchen table where I could watch all 8 camera feeds at once. My hunting rifle sat within arm's reach, loaded. I made pot after pot of coffee and forced myself to stay awake watching those screens. Hours passed. The camera showed nothing but the usual nighttime activity. A deer walked through around midnight. An owl flew past camera 5. Normal things, but I could not shake the feeling that something was out there watching, waiting just beyond the range of the cameras. By dawn, my eyes were burning and my body ached from sitting in the same position for so long. Nothing had happened. No Bigfoot, no movement in the trees. just a quiet night in the mountains. But I did not feel relieved. If anything, the lack of activity made me more anxious. I managed maybe an hour of restless sleep after the sun came up, then forced myself to stay awake through the day. I could not focus on work, I could not eat. All I could do was watch the tree line and wait. The second night was worse. I was running on pure adrenaline and fear by then, seeing shadows in every corner, jumping at every creak of the cabin settling. I sat at that table again, watching the cameras, the rifle across my lap. My eyes kept playing tricks on me, turning tree branches into reaching arms, making me think I saw movement where there was none. Again, nothing happened, just another quiet night. By the time the sun rose, I had been awake for almost 40 hours straight. I collapsed into bed and slept for maybe 2 hours before jerking awake, my heart pounding from another nightmare. I knew I could not keep this up. The exhaustion was destroying me, but the fear was stronger than the need for sleep. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones. By the third night, I was barely functional. I had not slept more than 3 hours in the past 72 hours. My hands shook constantly. My vision was blurry. I sat in my living room, the camera feeds open on my laptop, but I could barely focus on the screens anymore. Around 2:30 in the morning, I heard it. Footsteps outside, not bare footsteps, not deer. These were heavy, deliberate, bipedal. The sound of something massive walking on 2 legs, slowly circling the cabin. I lunged for my laptop, pulling up the camera feeds. Every single screen showed the same thing. No signal. All 8 cameras had gone dark at the same moment. The lights in my cabin were still on, the laptop was still running, the power had not gone out, but every camera was dead, showing nothing but that stark message. No signal. The footsteps continued outside, moving from the north side of the cabin toward the east side. Slow, patient. Whatever was out there was taking its time, and it did not care if I heard it. I grabbed my rifle and backed away from the door, putting the couch between me and the entrance. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The footsteps reached the east wall and paused. Then I heard it. A sharp scraping sound against the wooden exterior of the cabin. The scratching was like nothing I had ever heard. It sounded like long claws or nails dragging slowly across the wood, leaving deep grooves. The sound made my teeth ache and my spine go rigid. The scratching moved along the east wall, methodical and deliberate, not frantic or aggressive, but patient. Whatever was making that sound was in no hurry. It knew I was inside, and it knew I was not going anywhere. The sound reached the front corner of the cabin and began moving along the front wall, getting closer to the door. I could track its progress by the noise. Scratch, pause, coming closer. I raised the rifle, aiming at the door, my finger on the trigger. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the weapon steady. The scratching reached the doorframe and stopped. Silence, complete and absolute silence. No footsteps, no scratching, no sound at all except my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the rifle aimed at the door, waiting for whatever came next. My legs were cramping, my arms ached, but I did not dare move. Then I heard the voice. It was calling my name. From right outside the front door, a woman was calling my name. But not just any woman, it was my wife. My wife who had disappeared 2 years ago on a solo hike in these same mountains. My wife who the search teams never found. My wife whose body was somewhere out there in the wilderness, never recovered. My wife who I had finally, after months of searching and grief, accepted was gone forever. The voice kept calling my name over and over. Please open the door. I am so cold. Please let me in. I am right here. Just open the door." Part of my brain knew this was wrong. Part of me was screaming that this was impossible, that this was a trick, that I needed to stay away from that door. But another part of me, the part that had spent 2 years hoping against hope that she might still be alive somewhere, wanted desperately to believe it was really her. I lowered the rifle slightly, taking a step toward the door. The voice sounded exactly like her, the same cadence, the same gentle tone. But there was something slightly off about it, like someone playing a recording through a speaker with bad quality. The words were right, but the sound was wrong. "Please," the voice said, "I'm so cold out here. Let me in." I was standing right at the door now, my hand on the lock. Tears were streaming down my face. I wanted so badly for it to be her. I wanted to open that door and see her standing there, alive and whole. "Is it really you?" I said through the door. My voice was shaking. "Yes," the voice said calmly. "Open up. She is cold. Not I. She is cold, not I am cold. That should have stopped me. That one word should have been enough to make me back away from the door. But the exhaustion and grief and desperate hope clouded my judgment. I was not thinking clearly. I just wanted it to be her. I unlocked the door swung open, and I looked into the face of a nightmare. The thing standing on my porch was not my wife. It was not even remotely human. The creature stood in an unnatural crouch, maybe 7 feet tall, even bent over like that. Its skin was a sickly white, completely hairless, stretched tight over bones that seemed too long and angled wrong. The arms extended down past where knees should be, ending in hands with fingers like broken tree branches, each tipped with a black claw. But the face was what made my mind want to shut down completely. The eye sockets were hollow pits that somehow still contained eyes, pale and luminous, glowing with a sick yellowish light. The mouth was stretched impossibly wide, filled with teeth that were cracked and brown and broken. The whole face looked wrong, like something wearing a mask of human features but not quite getting the proportions right. Those glowing eyes locked onto mine, and the creature began to move forward into my cabin. I stumbled backward, too terrified to even scream. My legs hit the couch and I fell, landing hard on my back. The rifle clattered away across the floor. The creature kept coming, those 2 long arms reaching toward me, moving with a horrible fluid grace. I was going to die. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this thing was going to kill me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Then I heard the running footsteps. The sound came from the forest, thunderous and getting closer fast. Something massive was running at full speed toward the cabin. Through the open door, I saw a dark shape burst from the tree line, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. The Bigfoot hit the skinwalker like a freight train. The impact happened so fast I barely registered it. 1 second the skinwalker was reaching for me, the next it was gone, yanked backward out of the doorway by massive hands. Both creatures tumbled off the porch and into the clearing beyond. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the door, unable to look away from what was happening in front of my cabin. The Bigfoot was enormous, at least 8 feet tall and covered in thick, dark fur. It had the skinwalker pinned beneath it, one massive hand around the creature's throat. The skinwalker was thrashing and clawing, but the Bigfoot was stronger. They rolled across the ground, and suddenly the skinwalker broke free and scrambled toward the tree line. The Bigfoot was right behind it, and both creatures crashed into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. The sounds that came from those trees will haunt me for the rest of my life. Deep, powerful roars echoed through the forest. The Bigfoot was making sounds that were part animal, part something else entirely, protective, enraged, primal. and the skinwalker was screaming. The sound was like metal scraping against metal, high-pitched and horrible, making every nerve in my body light up with instinctive terror. I could hear branches breaking, trees shaking, the impact of massive bodies slamming into wood and earth. The fight moved deeper into the forest, the sounds becoming more distant but no less terrifying. I stood there in my doorway, frozen, unable to move or think or do anything except listen to that nightmare battle happening just beyond my sight. The fight lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. The roars and screams gradually moved further away until they were just faint echoes in the distance. Then, silence. Complete and absolute silence. No more roaring, no more screaming, no sound of movement in the trees. Just the quiet of the mountain night. I did not know which creature had won. I did not know if either of them had survived. All I knew was that I was still alive, standing in my doorway, staring into the dark forest. I sat on my cabin floor, back against the wall, rifle across my lap, staring at the open door. I could not bring myself to close it. Some part of me needed to see what was out there, needed to know if something was coming back. The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like it was moving. I kept expecting to see those glowing hollow eyes appear in the doorway, or to hear my wife's voice calling to me again. But nothing came. The forest remained silent and still. When the first light of dawn started filtering through the trees, I finally felt my muscles begin to unclench. I had made it through the night. Whatever had happened out there in the forest, I was still alive. As the sky grew lighter, I forced myself to stand. My legs were stiff and my whole body ached. I walked slowly to the doorway, rifle raised, and looked out at my property. The clearing in front of my cabin looked like a war zone. The ground was torn up, deep gouges in the earth where something heavy had been dragged. Branches were broken and scattered everywhere. Small patches of dark liquid stained the fallen leaves, though I could not tell if it was blood or something else. I stepped off the porch carefully, the rifle still in my hands, and walked to the nearest patch of disturbed ground. The gouges were deep, carved into the packed earth by something incredibly strong. I knelt down and touched the edge of one with my finger. The soil was torn and compressed, like massive hands had dug into it during a struggle. Following the trail of destruction, I walked toward the tree line. More broken branches, more torn earth. A small sapling was completely uprooted, lying on its side with the roots exposed. The bark on several larger trees was gouged and scraped, some of it hanging in strips. Whatever battle had happened here, it had been violent and primal. I found tufts of dark fur caught on rough bark. Bigfoot fur, I assumed, though I had no way to be certain. The strands were thick and coarse, nothing like human hair. I collected a few pieces and put them in my pocket, evidence of what had happened, even though I had no idea what I would do with them. I stepped out onto the porch and walked slowly around the cabin. On the east wall, I found the scratches. Deep grooves in the wood, 4 parallel lines dragged all the way along the wall. Whatever had made those marks had claws like knives, but there was no sign of either creature, no bodies, no tracks I could identify, just the evidence of the fight and nothing more. I went back inside and checked my cameras. They were working again, all 8 feeds showing clear images of my property. I pulled up the recordings from the night before and scrolled to 2:30 a.m. right when I had heard the footsteps. Nothing. The cameras showed nothing but darkness and then that no signal message. They had all gone dark at exactly 2:28 a.m. and come back online at 6:02 a.m. right around sunrise. During that entire window, they had recorded nothing. Whatever had happened to disable the cameras, it had been deliberate and complete. but I noticed something else. At 12:47 a.m., hours before the cameras went dark, there was footage of the skinwalker approaching my cabin. The creature moved with that same unnatural crouch, its white skin almost glowing in the infrared light, making it look like a ghost or a specter. It circled the cabin once, staying just at the edge of the camera range, like it was studying the building and looking for weaknesses. Then it disappeared from view, vanishing into the forest, and at 12:35 a.m., 12 minutes before the skinwalker appeared, there was footage of the Bigfoot. It stood at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden by trees, watching my cabin. Not moving, not approaching, just standing there in the shadows, completely still. It stayed there for almost 2 hours, just watching, waiting. The timestamp showed it was still there at 2:26 a.m., 2 minutes before the cameras went dark. I watched this footage over and over, trying to understand what I was seeing. The Bigfoot had known the skinwalker was coming. It had positioned itself between the skinwalker and my cabin hours before the attack. It had stood guard in the darkness, waiting for the moment when I would be in danger. The Bigfoot had been protecting me, not hunting me, not planning to hurt me, protecting me from something far more dangerous than itself. I spent that entire day in a daze trying to process what had happened. The pieces slowly came together in my exhausted mind, forming a picture that should have been impossible but was undeniably real. The Bigfoot had never been hunting me. The nightmares were not about the Bigfoot coming to get me. They were warnings. Somehow my subconscious had picked up on something wrong, something dangerous in the forest, and tried to tell me through dreams. My sleeping mind had sensed the approaching threat and created those images of something massive moving through the trees, trying to prepare me for what was coming. The Bigfoot had appeared on my camera not as a threat, but as a guardian. It had been checking my defenses, making sure I was protected. When it looked at the camera, it was not studying me. It was studying the area, looking for weak points, planning how to keep me safe. That long, steady gaze had been assessment, not aggression. And when the skinwalker finally came for me, the Bigfoot had been ready. It had waited in the trees for hours, watching, and struck the moment I was in danger. The moment that door opened and the skinwalker began to enter my cabin, the Bigfoot had charged. Not a second too early, not a second too late. Perfect timing born from hours of patient observation. That massive creature, that thing I had feared for 3 weeks, had saved my life. It had fought something terrifying and dangerous to protect a human it had no obligation to care about. The question was why? Why would a Bigfoot creature care about protecting a human? Why would it risk its own life fighting a skinwalker for someone it did not even know? I had no answer. I still do not have an answer. Maybe the Bigfoot saw humans as part of its territory, something to be protected like any other living thing in the forest. Maybe it had its own code of behavior that included defending the helpless against predators. Maybe it just did not like skinwalkers and would have fought it regardless of whether I was involved. But whatever the reason, the evidence was undeniable. The Bigfoot had chosen to help me. It had made a decision to intervene when it could have easily stayed hidden and let nature take its course. By late afternoon, as the shock began to fade and exhaustion set in, I knew what I needed to do. I needed to acknowledge what had happened, I needed to show gratitude, and I needed to establish some kind of peaceful relationship with this creature that was clearly going to remain in the area. I went to my freezer and pulled out everything that might work as an offering. Venison steaks from a deer I had shot the previous fall. A whole salmon I'd been saving for a special occasion. Vegetables from my garden that I had frozen. I loaded everything into a cooler and carried it to the edge of my property, right where the clearing met the forest. There was a large flat rock there, about waist high, that marked the boundary between my cleared land and the wild forest. It was perfect for leaving things. I arranged the meat and fish and vegetables on the rock carefully, trying to make it look intentional rather than random. This was not just leaving out garbage for an animal. This was an offering, a gesture of respect and gratitude. I stepped back and spoke to the trees, feeling slightly foolish but also deeply sincere. "Thank you, that was all I said, just thank you." The words felt inadequate for what the Bigfoot had done, but they were all I had. I walked back to my cabin without looking behind me, fighting the urge to turn around and watch the forest. If the Bigfoot was there, watching me make this offering, I did not want to make it uncomfortable by staring at it. This needed to feel like respect, not surveillance. That night, I checked the cameras obsessively, watching the rock. Hours passed with no movement. I started to worry that I had done something wrong, that my offering had been rejected or misunderstood. Maybe the Bigfoot had moved on. Maybe it did not want anything to do with me now that the danger had passed. At 11:34 p.m., a large, dark shape approached from the forest. The Bigfoot moved into view, walking upright with that same graceful gait I had seen before. It stopped at the rock and looked at the food for a long moment, completely still. Then it carefully picked up the salmon in one massive hand, holding it gently like it was something precious. It turned to look directly at camera 4, the one that had the clearest view of the rock. And it nodded, a single deliberate dip of its massive head. Acknowledgement, acceptance. Then it gathered the rest of the food, cradling the venison and vegetables against its chest with one arm while carrying the salmon in the other hand, and walked back into the forest. The whole interaction lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt monumental. When I checked the rock the next morning, it was clean. Not a scrap of food remained. Even the rock itself looked like it had been wiped clean, the surface free of any blood or juice from the meat. I left offerings every few days after that, sometimes meat, sometimes fish, sometimes vegetables and fruit. I tried to vary it, not knowing what the Bigfoot preferred, but wanting to provide options. Sometimes I would leave cooked food wondering if the Bigfoot had any concept of fire and cooking. Sometimes I left things raw, figuring that was probably more natural for a creature living in the forest. Every time the Bigfoot would come in the night and take the food. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of it on the cameras, brief moments where I could see its massive form moving with surprising quietness through the clearing. Sometimes the food would just disappear between frames like magic, the rock empty in one shot, and the next showing nothing but bare stone. I started to learn its patterns. It usually came late, between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. It always approached from the same direction, from the northwest where the forest was thickest. It never stayed long, maybe 30 seconds to a minute at most. And it always looked at the camera before leaving. That same deliberate nod of acknowledgement. A week after the first offering, I found something on the rock that I had not left there. Smooth stones arranged in a careful circle, each one perfectly placed with obvious intention. Inside the circle, small animal bones, placed in a pattern I did not understand, but that clearly had meaning. Around the stones, wildflowers that grew deeper in the forest, their stems still fresh, arranged like they had been deliberately positioned as decoration or ceremony. It was a gift, a response to my offerings, an acknowledgement that went beyond just taking food. The Bigfoot was trying to communicate, trying to establish a relationship based on mutual respect and exchange. I carefully gathered the stones and bones and flowers and brought them inside, placing them on my mantle where I could see them every day. They became a reminder that I was not alone out here, that something in the forest was watching over me with intelligence and purpose. Over the next few weeks, more gifts appeared. A beautiful piece of quartz, perfectly clear and about the size of my palm. A shed antler from a deer, polished smooth like it had been carefully cleaned. Feathers from birds I could not identify, arranged in a fan pattern. Each gift felt like a conversation, a way of saying that the Bigfoot understood what I was trying to do and appreciated it. The offerings continued for 2 months. The relationship, if you could call it that, seemed stable. The Bigfoot accepted my gifts, occasionally left small tokens in return, and I slept better knowing it was out there watching over the property. But I could not escape the fear. Every sunset brought anxiety, that familiar tightness in my chest as shadows grew longer and the forest grew dark. Every sound in the night made me jump, made me grab for the rifle, made my heart pound until I could identify the source. A branch falling, an owl hooting, wind rattling the windows. All innocent sounds that my traumatized mind interpreted as threats. I kept seeing that white face in my mind, those hollow, glowing eyes staring at me with alien hunger. I kept hearing my wife's voice, twisted and wrong, coming from that horrible mouth. The memory played on loop whenever I tried to sleep, jolting me awake with my heart racing and sweat soaking the sheets. My camera showed nothing unusual most nights, just deer and raccoons and the occasional visit from the Bigfoot, which should have been comforting, but somehow was not. Because I knew now what else was out there. I knew that skinwalkers existed, that they could mimic voices, that they hunted humans. And if one had found me, what was to stop another from coming? I watched the cameras obsessively anyway, terrified that one night I would see that skinwalker again, or maybe a different one, coming back to finish what the first had started. I imagined them out there in the forest, watching and waiting for a moment when the Bigfoot was not around to protect me. I could not eat properly. Food tasted like ash in my mouth. I lost more weight, my clothes hanging loose on a frame that was already too thin. I could not focus on work. Meetings became torture as I struggled to pay attention while my mind kept drifting back to that night, to the sound of scratching on wood, to the voice calling my name. I barely slept, maybe 3 or 4 hours a night, always jolting awake from nightmares that were different now, but just as terrifying. In my dreams, the skinwalker got past the Bigfoot. In my dreams, I opened the door and it was waiting right there. In my dreams, I heard my wife's voice and did not catch the mistake in time, and the thing came inside and there was no rescue. The isolation that I had once loved now felt suffocating. The forest that had been beautiful was now full of shadows and threats. Every tree could be hiding something. Every rustle of leaves could be the first warning of an approach. The quiet that had brought me peace was now filled with potential danger, with the absence of sound becoming more frightening than any noise could be. I found myself staying inside more and more, avoiding the porch where I used to spend my evenings. The outdoors felt exposed and vulnerable. Even in broad daylight, I could not shake the feeling that something might be watching from the trees, studying me, waiting for its moment. My friends stopped calling after a while. I had pushed everyone away with my paranoia and isolation. The few times someone did reach out, I gave short answers and made excuses to end the conversation quickly. How could I explain what I was going through? How could I make anyone understand that I was living in constant terror because a monster had tried to trick me using my dead wife's voice, and only the intervention of a creature that should not exist had saved my life? I realized I could not live like this anymore. The cabin, the forest, the life I had built here. It was all tainted by what had happened. Every good memory was now overshadowed by that one terrible night. I needed to leave. I needed to start over somewhere far away from these mountains and their secrets. 2 months after the attack, I made the decision to move. I could not spend another winter in these mountains, in that cabin, waiting for the skinwalker to return. The beauty of the wilderness meant nothing when I was too terrified to enjoy it. I started packing, sorting through my belongings, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. Most of it I would leave. The furniture, the books, the little pieces of life I had collected, they all felt meaningless now. Before I left, I wanted to make one final offering to the Bigfoot, something bigger than the usual food, a proper thank you and goodbye. I cleaned out my entire freezer, every piece of meat, every fish, every frozen vegetable. I added fresh vegetables from my garden, apples from the tree behind the cabin, even some dried goods from my pantry. I loaded everything into 2 large coolers and carried them to the rock. Under the food, I placed a piece of paper with a simple message written in thick marker. Thank you for saving my life. I am leaving now. Be safe. I did not know if the Bigfoot could read. I did not know if it would understand. But I needed to try to communicate, to let it know I was grateful and that I was not abandoning the area out of fear of it. That night, I watched the cameras from inside my half-packed cabin. At 2:47 a.m., the Bigfoot appeared. It approached the rock slowly, looked at the large pile of food, then carefully moved the coolers aside and picked up the piece of paper. It held the paper for a long time, studying it. Then it set the paper down gently, gathered the coolers, and looked directly at the camera. For maybe 15 seconds, we looked at each other through the camera lens. Then the Bigfoot turned and walked back into the forest, carrying the food. I never saw it again. My last night in the cabin was one of the strangest of my life. Everything was packed except my sleeping bag and the clothes I would wear the next day. The cabin felt empty and hollow, all the life stripped out of it. I could not sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag on the bare floor, staring at the ceiling, listening to the night sounds outside. Around 3 a.m., I heard my laptop chime with a camera alert. I pulled up the feed and felt my breath catch. The Bigfoot stood at the very edge of my property, right where the clearing met the forest. It was fully visible in the infrared light, standing upright, looking toward the cabin. It stood there for several minutes, completely still, just watching. I watched it back through the camera, feeling an odd mixture of sadness and gratitude. Then the Bigfoot raised one massive hand, held it up for a moment, and turned away. It walked into the forest and disappeared from view. It was a goodbye. I was sure of it. The Bigfoot had come to acknowledge that I was leaving and to say farewell in its own way. I closed my laptop and lay back down, tears running down my face. I had come to these mountains looking for peace and isolation. I had found that and so much more. I had found terror and wonder and the strange protection of something that should not exist. And now I was leaving it all behind. I'd left at dawn the next morning. I loaded my truck with a few belongings I was taking, locked the cabin door for the last time, and drove down that dirt road without looking back. I drove for 12 hours straight, putting as much distance between myself and those mountains as I could manage. I ended up in a small city 3 states away, renting an apartment in a busy neighborhood where I could see other buildings from my windows and hear traffic at all hours. The noise and light and constant presence of other people felt alien at first, but it also felt safe. There were no dark forests outside my window, no cameras to check, no mysterious creatures watching from the trees. I still have all the camera footage saved on a hard drive. Sometimes late at night when I cannot sleep, I pull it up and watch those clips of the Bigfoot. The first sighting when it looked at the camera and I thought it was coming for me. The night it took the offerings. That final moment when it raised its hand in farewell. I wonder if it still patrols those woods. I wonder if the skinwalker ever came back, or if the Bigfoot drove it away for good. I wonder if anyone else has moved into my cabin and if they have any idea what walks through those trees at night. Mostly, I wonder if the Bigfoot knows how grateful I am. I owe it my life. Without its intervention, that skinwalker would have killed me, probably slowly and horribly. The Bigfoot had no obligation to help me. It could have stayed hidden in the forest and let nature take its course, but it chose to act. It chose to protect me. I will never know why. People ask me sometimes if I regret moving to that isolated cabin in the first place. They ask if I wish I had never experienced what I experienced, never seen what I saw. The answer is complicated. I regret the trauma. I regret the fear that still wakes me up some nights. I regret that I can never look at a dark forest the same way again. I regret that my wife's voice has been corrupted in my memory, forever associated with that horrible imitation. But I do not regret knowing the truth about what exists in those old forests. I do not regret learning that there are things in this world far beyond our understanding. And I definitely do not regret being saved by a creature that chose compassion over indifference. The old woman in the bar was right. There are things in those mountains that have been there far longer than any of us. Things that do not want to be found. But not all of them are threats. Not all of them want to hurt us. Sometimes the scariest looking thing in the darkness is the only thing standing between you and something far worse. I live in the city now, surrounded by concrete and people and electric lights. I am safe here. But part of me will always be back in that cabin, watching the tree line, waiting for massive footsteps in the night. Part of me will always be connected to those mountains and the creatures that live there. And part of me will always be grateful to the Bigfoot that saved my life when it had no reason to care whether I lived or died. If you're reading this and you live near wild places, near old forests that have been there longer than human memory, pay attention to the signs. Pay attention to your dreams. Pay attention to the warnings from those who have lived in these places for generations. Not everything in the darkness is friendly. Not everything that calls your name is what it claims to be. But sometimes, just sometimes, the thing you fear most might be the thing that saves you when you need it most. For more interesting stories, check this out.